So a very personal interest in today's discussion and agenda. Brent Council and West London Business have worked in partnership to develop this series of 5 webinars, each looking at sustainability in a different sector. And today the spotlight is being put on construction. This is part of our shared ambition to support local businesses to go green. The key aim for the webinar this morning is to provide practical advice for going green in a way that helps businesses to survive and thrive. We can see that the low carbon circular economy is an economy that minimises waste and negative impacts on the climate. And in Brent, we have over 850 businesses already involved in some way in this low carbon circular economy. And we're really keen to build on this. We know that there are calls from local consumers for this shift to happen and happen faster, and there are key benefits for businesses that make this move. As will be explored across the webinar series, going green can help improve performance, drive innovation, and reduce costs. Turning to housekeeping, if I can ask everyone to keep your microphones on mute when you're not speaking. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. Please post any questions in the chat function as we go along, and we can come back to these during the Q&A. And there's also the opportunity to put up your hand to ask a question if you'd like to come in sort of orally. The slides and any other key resources will be shared with all of our guests after today's event. And the agenda for the next hour, which I think is going to come up on screen in a moment. Following the introduction, I will be handing over first of all to Councillor Sheth. Then we'll be hearing from Shaun McCarthy from Action Sustainability and the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and then we'll hear from David Doodle from St George, who are very active property developers across West London, and then we'll open up for questions. So a packed hour ahead of us, and I think without further ado, I'm going to pass across to Councillor Sheth to say a few words.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Krupa Sheth. I'm the Cabinet Member for Environment at Brent, overseeing our climate emergency strategy. In July 2019, Brent Council declared a climate and ecological emergency, and we committed to doing everything in our power to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. Despite the uncertainty of the past year, we know one thing: climate change is still coming, and it is coming fast. We cannot lose sight of the need for all of us as individuals and as businesses to act and avoid catastrophe, but also ensure our economic recovery from COVID-19 is environmentally sustainable, green, and fair. Brent is in the process of finalising its climate and ecological emergency strategy for the next 10 years. This strategy has been shaped by a year of engagement with our residents and stakeholders. Some of the core objectives within our strategy are built around supporting the transition to a low carbon, circular economy model, and also supporting our businesses to go green and reduce their carbon footprint throughout all of their operations. We know that the last year has been very challenging for many of our businesses. We hope that these webinars can give you some practical advice for going green in ways that will also benefit your business and help you survive and thrive in these difficult times. We encourage you to join our Brent Environmental Network, which will be a key mechanism to encourage collaboration, share information, and open up dialogue around climate action with Brent residents, businesses, and organisations. It will also be used to alert you of any opportunities, funding, and tips to help reduce you and your business's environmental impact. You can sign up for free through the Brent Council website. We also encourage you to sign up to the Brent Business e-newsletter, which will keep you up to date on the latest business news, events, and updates. Links to sign up to the Brent Environmental Network and Brent Business e-newsletter will be posted in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sheth. And without further ado, I think we'll hand across to Shaun McCarthy. Welcome, Shaun.
Okay, thanks very much and good morning, everybody. I'm Shaun McCarthy. I chair something called the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and I've been asked to talk for 10 minutes about the school, which is quite challenging for me because I could talk for about a fortnight about this. But to give you a brief overview, so I said, well, I won't use slides for 10 minutes, I'll just talk. So what is the Supply Chain School? The Supply Chain School is a virtual learning environment for the UK construction industry. We founded the school in 2012, and this was on the back of work that I was doing at the time in two roles. Firstly, I was chair of something called the Commission for a Sustainable London 2012. So I had oversight and assurance responsibility around the promise for London 2012 to be the most sustainable games ever. And in that role, I was reporting directly to the political leaders, so the Mayor of London and the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and independently in public. I'm also a Director of Action Sustainability. This is a business that I founded in 2006 to help organisations in their sustainable procurement challenges. Those two things kind of came together in that Skanska came to us as consultants to say, given the demand that we're seeing for more sustainable solutions from projects like the Olympics and other projects, and their ambition at the time to be the most sustainable construction company in the world, they'd worked out that 80% of their revenue goes to their supply chain, which is fairly typical of a big tier one construction contractor, and their supply chain was not sufficiently competent to deliver on the sustainability objectives that they require. So that was the exam question to us as consultants, which is where we came up with the concept of the school. So we also realized that this was bigger than Skanska. And it was something, if we were going to really deliver step change across an entire industry sector, we need to support the supply chain that does that. We can't just push requirements down the supply chain and say, we want you to be more sustainable without providing some help. So we partnered up at the time with 6 other contractors, six contractors and 1 supplier in the construction sector, and we started the school in 2012. We aimed to reach out to 600 learners during the first year, and we actually reached 3,000. So we thought we were onto something. The school has since grown now in numbers. We have over 110 partners. So partners are organisations that work with us to shape the delivery of the school. They also contribute financially to the school. And over 40,000 individual members. Those are people that participate in the learning. All of the learning opportunities that we provide in the supply chain school are free of charge. The way that we fund the school is through partner funding. So that's main contractors, suppliers, clients, some specialist subcontractors now in the industry that have an interest in really driving the sustainability agenda forward in the industry. And we also apply for industry funding from organisations like CITB, Innovate UK, etc., to deliver the school. What we have now is, if you join typically as a member of the school, you might do a self-assessment. So you would look at 17 sustainability topics incorporating social, environmental and economic sustainability, not just green, to understand your current level of knowledge around this subject matter. The system also looks at your category of supply if you're in the supply chain of the industry. So it gives you only the sustainability objectives that are relevant to you. So for instance, if you're a demolition contractor, you don't need to know too much about the energy efficiency of the built environment because you don't build buildings, you demolish them. So we give the suppliers the knowledge that's relevant to them. You can do a self-assessment and the system will give you a 10-point action plan to say, go use these learning resources, then you can reassess, get another 10 things, another 10 things, and another 10 things. So it's very much a la carte learning. You learn what you need to learn at the time that you need to learn it. We have over 100 e-learning modules on the school, over 200 short videos. We have 40 now what we call sustainability shorts, which are bite-sized learning, 10 minutes to understand about climate change, 10 minutes to talk about waste management, 10 minutes to talk about modern slavery, social value, whatever, which then leads you or can lead you onto a learning pathway to learn more about a specific subject. So you can access the resources in a variety of different ways. In addition to that, we deliver over 300 live learning interventions of one sort or another. Obviously, since the COVID crisis, we've had to move from live events with real people in real classrooms or big conferences in real conference rooms to what we've all got used to doing today and delivering everything virtually. But we like to think we've done that very well. We have lots of interactive tools. We've invested very heavily in our technology platform and also training of our teams for delivering virtual learning using interactive techniques, polling, breakout rooms. We use things like virtual whiteboards and that sort of thing to really kind of draw out people's knowledge and to get them working with us and really starting to understand the subject matter. We've moved on since then. As I said, we started off as a training initiative, but we've recognized now that with 110 partners, those partners between them have a lot of zeros on their checkbook. They're very influential to the supply chain across the piece. So we've set up special interest groups. So we have a climate action group where we're working with our partners to help supply chains to understand their carbon footprints. We've put out a free of charge carbon tool that people can put in their road miles, can put in their fuel and electricity usage, gas usage, etc., and it pops out a carbon footprint. The supplier can then apportion financially the amount of business that they do with Morgan Stanley, Balfour Beatty, Skanska, whoever. So we start to build up a carbon footprint of those tier one contractors. We also start to encourage those members then to use the free learning resources on the school to understand what they can do about their carbon footprint. So a big emphasis, and we heard from Councillor Sheth about the importance of the climate emergency. And we're very much driving our membership to take that seriously and do something about it. And if I'm honest, I've been quite shocked at how little attention is being paid in the small to medium enterprise community around carbon emissions. So there's lots more to do in that space. We have a waste group that are doing some great work on, for instance, a GIS map on material exchange platforms, just understanding where they are. If you've got surplus materials, where can you take it? Where might you be able to procure surplus materials from another project? We're doing a lot of work on packaging waste. The packaging tax is coming. A lot of our members are completely unaware of it and will be hit by it next year. So we're starting to look at how we can gather information on single-use plastics in packaging. We have a modern slavery group where we've delivered one set of guidance for the supply chain, not encourage the contractors to all go off in different directions and do slightly different things, confusing their supply chains and adding costs. So we can deliver these things at scale. Social value is a massive issue now, particularly for the public sector, with the implementation of the PPN 06 on the 1st of January this year, requiring central government and central government agencies to incorporate at least 10% of their tender evaluations on social value. That's sending a big shockwave through the supply chain. And once again, the solution is in knowledge, is in education, in getting people to understand what they can do to contribute to these various things. So the supply chain school is becoming the go-to place for knowledge and for learning. We're not just about sustainability anymore. We have a school for off-site construction. We're just in a process of rolling out some digital platform. We've got some work on procurement coming through, some new work in that space. We have a big program that we call Fairness, Inclusion and Respect, which is all about equalities and diversity in the construction sector, which again we know is not representative of the communities in which we live. So there's much more work to do in all of those areas. So we're an award-winning collaboration. We're working with all of the major players in the construction sector to try and make the industry a better world. All of our learning is CPD accredited, so those of you that are in professional institutions can accredit all of the e-learning and all of the workshops that we deliver for CPD. And most importantly, everything we deliver free at the point of use. We ask people to invest their time. Nothing is completely free. We are asking for an investment in time, but in the supply chain school, we would never ever ask our members for money. We don't want to add cost to the supply chain, we want to add value. So I'll stop there, my little 10-minute rant. I'm very happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.
Shaun, goodness, lots there for us to soak up, and I'm sure lots of questions sort of bubbling away out there amongst our delegates that we'll want to come back to you on shortly. But I think we'll turn now to David for a sort of perhaps slightly more local perspective. I said in my intro that St George have a significant footprint across West London, but of course in London Borough of Brent, the Grand Union scheme is now starting to rise out of the ground. So local residents can observe in practice what St George are up to. But over to you, David, to tell us more.
Great, thank you very much. Right, I am going to use slides for my session, so I will just try and sort of share those now. Fingers crossed you will get them up. So hopefully you can all see them now. Is there any
all good? Yeah, good.
Fabulous, thank you. So yeah, so first of all, yes, my name's David Doodle. I'm the sustainability manager for St George. St George is part of the Berkeley Group, and thank you very much for kind of allowing me this opportunity to go through kind of some of our operations at sort of Grand Union. Sorry. Right, so I was going to do a little bit of context just in the first place. As I mentioned, St George is a mixed-use property developer and a division of the Berkeley Group. We, you know, sort of the primary focus of our operations is reviving underused land, creating sustainable places where communities thrive, where people can enjoy a great quality of life. And, you know, we very much specialise in sort of the redevelopment of brownfield sites. And a general ethos for sort of Berkeley Group is, you know, is we very much kind of pride ourselves on our passion for quality, and sort of everything that we do in terms of our designs and the places that we develop. We've got a very strong ethos generally for sort of Berkeley Group, and we strive to be a market leader in this environment. Our goal is to be world class in terms of sustainability, both in terms of running our business efficiently, considerately, and by developing sustainable places, not just now, but sort of in the future, in years to come. And we've been recognised for that. Over the last 2 years at the House Builder Awards, we've been named most sustainable developer. We've been carbon positive for the sort of 3 years. So again, we look to minimise our emissions in the first place, but we also then sort of offset this anything that's unavoidable. In December of 2020, we have now sort of we now introduced verified science-based targets in support of the COP21 ambitions, and that really encompasses our entire operations. So, you know, emissions from our direct operations, looking at the carbon impact of the materials and services that we use, and also looking at to reduce the in-use emissions of the homes that we build. Internally at the moment, we've just released a new sustainability strategy, And that focus is kind of, again, sort of on all aspects of our business. So again, the communities that we're looking to put in place, we're looking at kind of nature, we're looking at kind of climate change, we're looking at the resources that we use as a business, and to follow on sort of from what Shaun said in his talk, we are one of the supply chain sustainability school partners. So to give you a bit of, again, sort of further information on Grand Union itself. Grand Union's a 9 sort of hectare regeneration development site in Alperton. For those of you sort of that don't know where it is, it's just off the North Circular, sort of tucked behind the Ace Cafe. We're going to be on site there for sort of quite some time because we've got consent for over 3,000 homes to develop. They're going to be highly energy efficient and water efficient. One of the aims and things that we've been recognised for as a business is our desire to kind of improve biodiversity and bring biodiversity again to sites, and that's something that we should achieve at Grand Union with a significant increase from what was there kind of originally. We're going to be developing a new community and contributing to kind of the current community that's there at the moment. And as you can kind of see sort of from sort of the graphic there, you know, that we hope that what we'll be kind of delivering in Brent will be a great addition. So to move on to the sort of topic of sustainability, and one thing I'll do through kind of the course of my next slides is talk specifically about some of the things that we're doing at Grand Union to try and give you sort of a few examples and case studies. So from a sustainable homes perspective, I mentioned that, you know, we look for them to be highly energy and water efficient. So again, you know, as standard, they will come with low energy lighting. We're looking to incorporate the mechanical heat ventilation, so mechanical ventilation units with heat recovery to use the efficiencies. The white goods will be highly efficient. You know, there will be highly insulated buildings again, which will kind of help with the efficiency and the energy efficiency of the homes. Water efficiency is also key. So again, looking at how we can make sure that the taps, the toilets, the showers, and all of those other kind of aspects of it are set up to help our residents be efficient with water. We're going to be putting in like riverside meadows with sort of pollinating species and things, creating little habitats, so again to improve the biodiversity on site. And again, sustainable transport is something that we're very kind of focused on. So there will be electric car charging in place, and huge amounts of kind of cycle spaces for cycle storage to again kind of encourage the sustainable transport agenda. Moving on to kind of what we're doing on site and then sort of what we're doing as a business. We also look to kind of run our business sustainably on a day-to-day basis. So again, when it comes to our operations on site, you know, we universally employ LED lighting. We're very kind of conscious about the products and materials that we use on site. So again, we specify certified timber from either FSC or PEF sources. Hopefully, as you can sort of see from the photo to the left, you know, we've incorporated a wheel washer on site that recycles water, again, to kind of maintain that level of efficiency. We try and reuse materials, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail later. We've got a water harvesting system in site that's only small at the moment, but I think there's potential for greater use of that. We looked at our demolition materials and how we could kind of use them in the construction process. We're incorporating bathroom pods, and we've got a bottle return scheme on site where we encourage the operatives of part of our supply chain to pay a deposit to have a reusable bottle, and that helps us reduce single-use plastic on site. So to give you sort of some of the specifics and practical uses of how we run our operation on site, I think one of the things that I suppose I would sort of stress as much as a key point really is getting the basics right about setting your site up incorrectly in the first place, and just kind of taking those kind of basic options that allow you to control energy on site. You know, so because turning it down, turning it off, avoiding that waste in the first place is a fundamental part of energy efficiency. For example, all of our drying rooms, we look to include switches, timers and thermostats, things that kind of can allow us to control it and automate what's happening on our site. The hoarding lighting is on photocells. So again, adding that extra layer of automation. And from our perspective, you know, it's much more cost effective to get those aspects right than sort of retrospectively kind of trying to fit in other schemes sort of later on. And as I said, it's getting that set up right. I'd also advise, speaking to your suppliers and getting advice from your suppliers. They will have experience as well, and quite often they will come up with good ideas for things that we can do, and use data to make decisions. There's a chart there on the slide which is from a week in October, where we look at our energy consumption on site, and we can kind of make basic conclusions from that information. Trying to understand what time things are coming on, what time things are coming off, and whether those kind of out of hours energy consumption is reasonable, and whether we can kind of reduce those. And that information is kind of really useful for us. In terms of energy efficiency, again, going into more detail about some of the lighting, a scheme that we've incorporated on site is not just LED lighting, but incorporating it, the temporary lighting on site with PIRs. So essentially, it's got movement sensors, and if it doesn't detect movement, then it'll turn off. And that we also use in conjunction with a timer. So again, the system can only be on during kind of construction hours. For us, it gives us the opportunity to save carbon. It gives us the opportunity to not use electricity. And I think we've sort of estimated that over the course of the 2 years, that's likely to be in place. That will sort of save us a couple of tons of carbon and probably about £1,000 worth of energy. But I have to say, don't be afraid to learn from experience. Certainly that's something that we do and we continue to do. And when we set this sort of system up on site, there were issues in terms of, sort of not being sufficient movement on occasions, and that's things that we will constantly look to overcome. But yeah, certainly try and learn from experience. As I mentioned, we have water harvesting on site. So again, what you see there is a tank that's linked up to the guttering from the cabins in the main project compound. One of the advantages of our site is we're obviously going to be on there for quite a number of years. So, we are able to kind of make these sort of slightly more long-term decisions. But in the case of the water harvesting, it was actually something that we moved over from another site. So where Shaun talked about sort of sharing resources, that's something that we kind of try and do. But when you consider that we have 300 operatives on site and we can kind of use that tank to provide water for the toilets in the main compound, there's the potential for us to save a significant amount of water. And speaking to the site team, there's definitely opportunities to expand that system as we grow as a construction site, sort of down at Grand Union, and the amount of roof space. I think there's definitely opportunity for us to kind of add to that. Another aspect that makes up our sustainability operation on site is the consideration of waste and waste management. So I think Shaun mentioned sort of modern methods of construction, but one of the things that we're kind of looking at a business is that kind of off-site element. So one of the things that we're doing down there on site is we're using sort of bathroom pods, trying to design out waste in the first place. So again, that allows us to bring kind of the finished product to site rather than all the little components, and that brings with it efficiencies from sort of reduction in waste and reduction in resources required to kind of put those in place. We look to reuse and recycle materials on site. We obviously bring in sort of vast amount of materials because it's a large construction site, but where we can, we will look to use any sort of reuse any sort of spare materials, and there's some of the examples there. So within seating, external seating areas, hopefully you can see we've reused cable drums and pallets to create seating and outdoor seating. Within drying rooms, we've used waste timber to develop sort of and put benches in place. We can reuse timber for our temporary works on site, sort of staircases, for example. And then we're not afraid to have a little bit of fun with it as well. So I think we've had ply from the frame stage that was left over, and we've you can create bird boxes. I don't think they've done that at this site, but they've definitely done it at other sites. We incorporate a user pay system. So again, this is where we work with our supply chain. So when our supply chain is considering they're a package, We ask them to make an allowance for their waste requirement on site, because we as a business will manage the waste. And therefore, it asks and encourages the contractors to consider what waste they will require, and it incentivizes them, to some extent puts the risk in their ballpark, because they will need to kind of consider what requirements they need. And again, it's encouraging, I think, that kind of collaboration and kind of thought process. So part of this, when we were talking about kind of delivering today's webinar, was to try and kind of explain also as well why being sustainable is so vital for St George, so vital for the Berkeley Group business. And there's a whole host of sort of reasons there, and if I could maybe sort of touch on a few of them. And I think some of the most important ones is, you know, we want to, you know, sort of set ourselves apart and be a market leader in sustainability. So it very much gives us that kind of market differentiation. It gives us that opportunity to set ourselves apart. It contributes to the developments that we're putting in place. And there's lots of requirements now with things like the London plan, planning requirements to incorporate sustainability. So, you know, it very much kind of maximizes that potential on site. And as you see, it allows us to kind of go and win boards and arguably minimize risk, because obviously we want to make sure that kind of, you know, we minimize the risks associated with our site. So to conclude, and before questions, you know, that for me is, I think, my kind of key messages of what we and how we try and operate on site. So definitely try and kind of embed sustainability from the start, because I think that's absolutely the best time to kind of put measures in place. Try and get those sort of basics right, as I think they're kind of the fundamentals for being sustainable. Speak to your suppliers and incorporate things within supplier contracts. So again, you know, we look to kind of standardize elements. Use data where possible, because again, that helps you understand your business. And you can focus on those areas of greatest impact. And I think Shaun mentioned as well, sharing resources. Across Berkeley Group, we share resources across our sites. We're all often sort of in different phases. So again, you know, kind of avoiding that waste and sort of sharing those resources is key, and learn from your experiences. So that sort of brings me really to kind of the end of my presentation. So I'll sort of hand you back to Andrew now. And sort of stop sharing my my slides. But yes, hopefully that's useful. And
fantastic. Thank you, David. Lots packed in there again for us to reflect on in the sort of remaining 25 minutes. Just to remind everyone that's with us today, we've got the chat window where you can post any questions for Shaun and David. I've been searching for a hands up function. We seem to have almost every other emoticon going except for hands up. So if I can suggest that you use the yes tick in the participants list maybe as one option, or just put your camera on and give me a vigorous wave in front of the camera. I'll know that you want to put your microphone on and ask a question directly to Shaun and David. But as always, I've got plenty of questions up my sleeve myself to get things started. So I wonder, a question really to both of you, what your steer would be in terms of, I suppose, good first steps for SMEs in the construction supply chain to be thinking about if they're moving into environmental sustainability perhaps for the first time. I don't know which of you would like to come in first. Maybe Shaun, your thoughts there.
Yeah, of course, I would say join the supply chain school and learn some stuff. But seriously, I would start with your customers, understanding what your customers are actually asking for. And you know, you've heard a really good presentation from David. So if you're in the supply chain of Berkeley Group, or probably, you know, most other house builders are going down similar tracks, I'd start by understanding what your customers are actually asking for in terms of sustainability, because that will win you business and it will get you closer to your customer by having a conversation with the customer about what they're looking for. I mean, you know, David's advice is get some advice from your suppliers. So that buyer-supplier relationship is really, really important. And if you're a business in the value chain anywhere in the construction sector, you're never going to have a customer that says, we love your products, we love your price, take all the green stuff out and the job's yours. It's never going to disadvantage you. And it could well make the difference between winning a job and not winning a job.
So talk to your customers first. David,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
I mean, first of all, I definitely echo the sentiment by sort of Shaun there about working with the customers and giving you that competitive advantage. You know, we as a business look to encourage our commercial teams to procure on best overall value. So, you know, we're very keen for kind of our supply chain to come to us with sort of things they're doing. In terms of advice for SMEs, I think for me, it would be, it would also be understanding your business as well, understanding where your environmental and sustainability impacts are, because that gives you the best opportunity, I think, to influence those. To see where your greatest impacts are, and to hopefully then kind of make efficiencies that are relevant to your business.
Now, picking up on that point, a lot of sort of environmental footprints that I've sort of looked at for the construction industry over the years have particularly put a spotlight on both concrete and steel as being some of the worst offenders for carbon emissions. What are your respective reflections on kind of where the industry's currently at in addressing those challenges? And again, for SMEs, what they might want to start thinking about today? Shaun.
Yeah, this is the whole subject of embodied carbon is something that's emerged over the last 10 years or so, and the realization that the energy of buildings is not necessarily just in the use of the building, it's in constructing the building in the first place. There's a massive debate around choice of materials, and which is the most sustainable choice. And of course, you know, the concrete industry will say it's concrete, and the steel industry will say it's steel, and the timber industry will say it's timber. And then everybody will have a go at, you know, timber because of the glues in cross-laminated timber, etc., etc. So certainly my advice would be to be better informed about some of the low carbon options, and all of those materials have their benefits in terms of sometimes the longevity of the building, the design of the building. Things like some precast concrete solutions can actually be low carbon solutions because they're more efficient and they use less concrete. Also, we've touched very briefly on modern methods of construction and off-site construction. There's potentially an awful lot of saving in materials by creating buildings in factories effectively and shipping them to site. So it is quite a complex area, but most of the supply chain out there is quite savvy to their carbon footprint these days. There's a movement called responsible steel that the steel sector brings together. The concrete and cement industry has a similar group of people that come together and think deeply about these things. And certainly, if you were to go to any of the the mainstream suppliers, they would be able to give you a very good articulation of their carbon footprint and what they're doing to reduce it. Also, you know, designing out carbon. And this is really for the architects and the designers out there to start thinking about potentially what are the solutions that actually use less materials and have lower carbon footprints in their material selection. So I think we've come a long way in this subject. There's obviously still more to go in terms of thinking about what actually goes into our building's footprint before anybody even occupies a building.
Interesting thoughts. And David, are concrete and steel keeping you up at night?
I mean, concrete and steel is certainly a very big kind of consideration for us as a business. You know, particularly when it kind of comes to the way St George develops, we obviously do use a kind of a considerable amount of concrete. And I think, you know, I think Shaun's sort of spot on there, really, about the embodied carbon piece. You know, as part of the London plan, we're going to be doing sort of whole life carbon assessments kind of going forward. And again, with our science-based target, you know, understanding those kind of products and services that we're going to be doing and the embodied carbon associated with them now is something we're going to look at acutely. So there's sort of not really much more to add to that, really. I think it's you know, it's something that has a place within, certainly a place within construction, but you know, we as a business are looking at kind of that modular aspect of it, those precast elements that we can come to site, that can kind of come to site because of the efficiencies that brings. And sort of Berkeley Group themselves, we've actually just opening up a modular factory to try and help us embrace those kind of modern methods of construction to bring that embodied carbon down.
So it sounds like a sort of work in progress for the industry, but I think an interesting concept there of sort of designing out the embodied carbon, if you can, when you're still on the drawing board. I'm going to sort of take a slightly different sort of direction, but I think sort of still building on the same theme, and that's looking at sourcing more generally. Over the years, we've seen various directories pop up to try and help the supply chain source greener products. Are there particular directories that you both sort of encourage the supply chain to turn to at the moment? Because you know you using Google can eat up hours to try and find the right answer, can't it, Shaun?
I guess I'd have to say no. It's such a difficult subject, and it's something that I've looked at on and off for about 20 years now. You know, can you produce a directory of more sustainable suppliers? You know, that's really difficult because life moves on so fast, and the sustainability agenda, you know, evolves so rapidly. I mean, a number of people are using the EcoVadis assessment, which is out there. You know, organizations like Achilles, Construction Line, Chaz, you know, all have pre-qualification platforms, and they all incorporate sustainability in some way or another. But it's very, very difficult. It's something we've been asked to, you know, to look at in the school in the past, to say, well, you know, can we have like a directory of endorsed suppliers or endorsed products? And I've always said, well, actually, no, because how do you control that? How do you actually verify it and manage it? The other initiative that I've seen on a bigger scale that does have some credibility and is coming to the UK is being developed by UL in the United States. United Laboratories, they're a massive organization that they're the organization that certifies the certifying authorities in the States, if you like. So they've got a massive spread and an understanding of which product certifications are good ones and which are not so good, because it's very well to say, you know, I want to buy Fair Trade, or I want to buy Rainforest Alliance, or I want to buy, you know, BES 6001 certified building materials. I think it's a responsibility of the purchaser to understand what those certifications actually mean, because they're not all what they say they are, and they're not all necessarily verified in the same way. So sorry, I can't be more helpful and point you to a nice list to say, if you go to that list, you'll be more sustainable. I'm a procurement professional by background, and I know that procurement is more complicated than that. And it is incumbent upon the buyer to actually do their supply due diligence properly and to really understand what they're buying.
No, I think a very important point there, and of course the Grenfell tragedy in our West London backyard really puts a spotlight on that responsibility.
There's a lot of work in the procurement sector. I'm working a lot at the moment with the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply to roll out some more training through the school for procurement people, and this is training in procurement skills rather than sustainable procurement, which we also specialise in. And there certainly is, as a result of the Hackett report, a huge amount of focus being placed on the need for procurement professionalism and to be able to do that job better. And you know, very sadly, a lot of people have lost their lives at Grenfell, and you know, the procurement profession has some responsibility for that oversight that happened tragically. So yeah, it's important that we do procurement better, and that's something that we're very much across with the school and working with SIPs. And as my business action sustainability, we're also I led the UK delegation in developing the ISO 2400 standard for sustainable procurement, which is also a very important part of how we upskill the procurement profession to do this better.
Thank you. David, what's your approach of tapping into directories or using other tools?
No, well, I mean, obviously we have quite a significant supply chain, and we have kind of quite a large database of contractors. I wouldn't have said we use any sort of databases or sort of directories specifically. We obviously have sort of standards and things that we develop as a business and expectations, and we will be, you know, when it's working with our supply chain, particularly in terms of internally what's going into a building, you know, we can be quite specific in terms of the things that we want. Obviously, you know, so we place sort of a high emphasis on sort of quality. I mean, for me, you know, it's things like sort of our kind of specification of things like sustainable timber. You know, that's where I think we kind of make those decisions in terms of what we want in place, rather than necessarily using a directory as such. You know, so going back to that point about, you know, we only really allow FSC, PEFC sort of type timber to come on site, because that gives us that, you know, sort of element of control and understanding of the materials kind of coming onto site.
Now, I'll just confess, I've been reminded myself through a loft conversion project that's currently happening at my home that it's very easy to misjudge the quantities of materials required on a building site. We've got surplus tiles at the moment sitting in the front yard. So my ears pricked up, Shaun, when you mentioned the material exchange platforms and the sort of mapping that you're doing of those. What's your sort of take on that landscape, and I wonder, David, whether you've got any practical examples of where St George have been able to use such tools. So Shaun, tell us more.
They get a better builder that can actually measure and estimate the number of tiles correctly. It's not rocket science, is it really? But we do have an industry that's kind of institutionally wasteful. And this whole idea that, you know, you put a contingency on quantities because you expect to break them and lose them, and you know, and all sorts of stuff is really quite archaic. I think modern methods of construction and off-site construction can help, because in a factory environment, it's easier to control quantities. I think we can learn a lot from the manufacturing sector. You know, you're not going to see like Ford Motor Company saying, "Oh, we got a surplus of door mirrors. We ordered too many." I mean, you know, it really just doesn't happen. So I don't think there are any excuses. I'm sorry. So getting things right in the first place, really understanding quantities, making sure that those quantities are controlled in a better way. Often using offsite techniques, so you know you're going to break less stuff and use less stuff if you're actually doing it in a factory rather than on site. So you know there are some challenges of building on site that lead us to this whole idea of you know of overstating quantities. But then, yeah, materials exchange platforms. I was really quite surprised when our waste group came up with this idea, because I thought surely somebody's already done this. There must be, you know, a website somewhere with a map of where I can take my surplus materials, and there wasn't. So we've done one, and we've started to encourage that idea of reuse. So I think the industry could be better in the way that we design buildings and the way that we estimate quantities. And again, this is an issue of professionalism. I think we can do better if we do move to more factory-based production of building components rather than relying on everything turning up on site and, you know, we drop things and we waste things. I think there are ways of looking at packaging in a more innovative way. So, for instance, this is a case study from 10 years ago when Skanska were working on Bart's Hospital. They were installing thousands and thousands of luminaires. I can't quite remember how many lights they had to install, but it was an awful lot. And they put a challenge to their lighting supplier to say, we'd like reusable packaging, please. We don't want this stuff turning up in cardboard boxes, and then we have to pay money to get rid of the cardboard box. So the supplier came up with collapsible plastic crates. So the luminaires arrive in a plastic crate, you collapse it down and you send it back to the supplier. And then it comes back again as another crate with another bunch of light bulbs in it. This saved very significant cost because obviously there wasn't the cost of disposing of the cardboard boxes. But interestingly, they found that typically the lights that were delivered in cardboard boxes, there was around about 10% breakage. So they were buying 10% more light bulbs than they needed because they were breaking the damn things before they actually got to install them. Whereas in the plastic crates, they were actually much more secure and the number of breakages went down virtually to zero.
That's a great case study. I imagine also that there's a challenge in the demolition phase sometimes with materials being generated and needing to find a new home. David, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I would love to say that we through procurement and things and our site teams get the materials amounts perfect every time, but it definitely does happen. It's something, you know, we're aware of business and we very much, I think, kind of in those unavoidable circumstances encourage communication between our sites, between our teams. Obviously, the Sustainability Supply Chain School have got their own platform. We have an internal one within sort of Berkeley Group. You know, we've got, I think, around sort of 60 active developments at the moment, and they're constantly going through different sort of phases. And, you know, it's not necessarily just about sort of surplus materials. It's about those things that are used across our sort of compounds and fencing and things, which, you know, I think previously might have been disposed of, but now that we're trying to very much kind of promote an ethos of actually talk to the other sites, say what you've got available. And we've got an example, I think, you know, over the last sort of week or so where I think some materials have gone over from Beaufort Park in Hendon, have actually gone over to be used and will be used around site on Grand Union. So I think it's providing those kind of mechanisms and allowing those and promoting those conversations, because let's say I think it you know, with the best will in the world, it does happen on occasions, and whilst we will try and sort of do everything to eliminate it, it's providing those opportunities to give those materials a kind of a reuse opportunity.
Really interesting. Now, as we come to the top of the hour, I'm going to give you two questions as a bundle from our delegates this morning. The first comes from Nimesh Mehta at Harrow, who says that as a head of procurement, he can see that there's potentially a sort of pound cost to this drive to be carbon neutral and sustainable, and he senses that it's need to find the right balance between delivering against this important agenda and being able to afford to do so. Reflects hopefully the costs will come down as climate change and sustainability requirements more commonplace. But what are your thoughts on that cost challenge? And then from Tom, we have a sort of question as to what you think the biggest risks are in future for organisations that just sit on their hands and decide to do nothing about climate change and sustainability. So over to Shaun for your thoughts.
There are sometimes some additional costs, but as procurement professionals, we should not allow that to happen. What is it about using less energy, wasting less stuff, and using less materials that's going to cost you more? The example that I've just quoted in Bart's Hospital, there are loads of opportunities to save money. So to hold your hands up and go, oh, this is going to cost more. No, sorry, don't accept that. Sustainability should not cost you more, but bad procurement will. In terms of what are the risks, I think there are existential risks for businesses that do not come on this agenda. You see it everywhere now. You've only got to look at the adverts on the TV. Everybody's trying to outgreen each other. You've only got to look at the way that the public sector is driving sustainability through the supply chain, and indeed, responsible developers like Berkeley Homes and others. This is not going to go away, and I think there's a real threat to the survival of the businesses who do not adopt this agenda.
Thank you, and I know you need to slip away any minute, Shaun. So you'll be forgiven if you do.
Yes, I've got another session at 10 o'clock, but I need to prepare for very briefly. So
completely understand. David.
I think that's sort of the main comments I would sort of make on that, really. In terms of those kind of costs, yes, there are some extra and over costs, but we very much kind of encourage our businesses and our procurement teams to try and incorporate that from an operational point of view, rather than necessarily thinking about just the kind of the capital upfront costs. And one of the advantages of a site like Grand Union is, that we're going to be there for an extended period. So, when it kind of comes to those sort of paybacks, we've got a greater breadth of opportunities. I think also as well, for us, there's the added value piece because of sort of what it represents, and it supports our ambitions as a business. And if we want to remain a market leader and we want to kind of continue to sort of strive as a business to reduce our carbon emissions, we should be kind of looking at ways that we can kind of procure creatively. And I think our teams do that when they kind of look at the packages. We have suppliers that we work with on a regular basis that brings things to us, and it's having that sort of dialogue at the way we can incorporate those things in a cost-effective way to make sure that we can sort of benefit from them. I mean, in terms of the risk piece, I think I sort of showed that slide, one of my final slides, about why sustainability is vital for our business. We're certainly not going to be a market leader if we do nothing. And I have to say, we look to work with sort of companies that share our ethos. And if you're a business that doesn't really place a high emphasis on sustainability, I think that would potentially influence our kind of consideration. So I think there's lots of sort of advantages, and if you're not considering kind of sustainability, you really ought to be.
We've run out of time, which is hugely frustrating. I was hoping to pick your brains, David, on carbon offsets, which is always a hot topic as to where to go to buy them. But we'll have to pick up another day on that theme. Just to remind everyone, as we sort of come to close this morning's session, we will of course be making slides, resources available. I think we're also, I think Maddie's producing sort of takeaway summaries from all these seminars of some of the headline insights from our speakers. Certainly at West London Business, we'd encourage, if you haven't already started as a business, to measure your baseline footprint, to crack on and do so. If you're looking for a tool to do that for the first time, you could of course turn to the Supply Chain Sustainability School, but equally feel free to drop myself an email or Maddie at Brent, and we can make sure get your hands on those tools to get an early sense of your footprint, which is so important, as David highlighted, in terms of us all putting down science-based targets to plan how we race to net zero. There are 3 more upcoming webinars in this series that will be covering sort of retail, hospitality, and the media and creative sector. So please help us spread the word and encourage other SMEs locally with an interest in those areas to sign up on Eventbrite. And of course, as we mentioned sort of earlier in Councillor Sheth's introduction, you've got the Brent Business e-newsletter you can sign up to, and also the Brent Environmental Network. So finally, just to say a huge thank you to Shaun and David for joining us this morning, sharing their expertise, and of course Maddie and the team at Brent for managing all of the logistics in today's webinar. So have a great day everyone, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care.